Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Humanities Center for the third session in this semester's series on the idea of home. By the way, if you're driving around San Diego this month, you will be lucky enough to see our wonderful billboards that are up on Morena Boulevard and in North Park. They're great, so enjoy. Following last week's fascinating foray into the history of homes, we turn our attention today to the literary home. And to guide us through this subject, we have three very, very special guests, all of whom are professors in USD's Department of English. Jason Crum received his BA here at USD before earning his PhD at UCSD, a specialist in modern American fiction and the graphic novel. Dr. Crum has authored papers on techno-Orientalism in U.S. culture, Latino community agency in interwar Los Angeles radio, and objectivist poetry. His current research explores trans-border communities in early 20th century U.S. radio and culture. A true friend of the Humanities Center, he taught a great class on seascapes and the literary imagination for our Natural Landscape series, which focused on work by Melville, Conrad, Hemingway, and others. Halina Duraj received her PhD in creative writing from the University of Utah, having previously specialized in the field of biology. That's a fascinating combination of interests that appeals to our own science arts focus here at the Humanities Center. Dr. Duraj's debut short story collection, The Family Canon, was published with Augury Books in 2014 and was a finalist for the Council of Literary Magazines and Press's debut fiction award. Her stories have been published in The Sun, the Harvard Review, Fiction, Witness, and other journals, while her story Fatherland was awarded a 2014 Penn O. Henry Prize. Dr. Duraj has been a writer in residence at Hedgebrook and Yaddo. Yaddo? Yeah. Like Dr. Crum, Lisa Smith was educated here at the University of San Diego, where she received her master's in English. Her specialisms lie in the areas of contemporary fiction, literature for children and adolescents, and the Bildungsroman. Her work for the Humanities Center has become absolutely central to our operations. She is a frequent and memorable contributor to our Tuesday series, devises imaginative seminar classes for our students, including offerings on Italo Calvino, Little Red Riding Hood, and J.G. Ballard, the last one of which didn't happen. And she is the creative force behind one of our most impactful and ambitious projects, the campus-wide Great Read series, this semester focusing on Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Now, like a child on Christmas Eve, I've been excitedly awaiting this special session in Humanities Center's series on home. So please give a very warm welcome to Professors Crum, Duraj, and Smith.
Yep. Okay. So thank you, Brian, very much for that nice intro. And hello. I'm happy to be here with everybody, all my friends and the boss, and my close friends who I feel very supported and held. I'm with them. So let me see if I can. Don't panic. It looks like a lot. It's just the font is very large because I can't see. So it always ends up being bigger than it should be. I want to thank Lindy. Thank you, Lindy, and thank you, Maggie, for everything that you do. Hello, Shelley, and hello, Otto. Nice to see you. So I'm going to be talking about Wuthering Heights because, as Brian mentioned, we're doing it in the Great Read series, and I'm into it, and because I don't have the energy to read anything else, so I'm just going to stay with that. It's one of my very favorite books. I love it with all my heart. I think it is endlessly fascinating. I think you could talk about anything and everything, and in fact, it took me a long time to narrow this down. In fact, an hour ago, I cut like half a page. So, you know, whether it's going to make sense or not, I don't know. But it's a fabulous, beautiful, strange novel, and if you haven't read it, you ought to. So when I was thinking about it, it's a novel about houses and furniture and all kinds of stuff like that, but I tried to figure out how am I going to fit it into this idea of home and talk about the idea of home. This for a long time was thought to be the model for Wuthering Heights, but it's since been debunked and it's too small. But it captures the idea poetically. It's very, very nice, I think. So when I was thinking about it, weirdly, this thing came to me. For some reason, I had this memory of this method that I was taught when I was young, this memorization method. It's called the Roman method. If you're old, you might have learned this as well. Sometimes it's called the method loci, or loci, or loci. You do your own Latin. And but in a more pretty fashion, it's called the memory palace. And so really briefly, in case you don't understand this, or you've never done it, it's strangely effective. So let's say you have a presentation. You take your presentation and you break it up. So you have your intro and your body and your conclusion, whatever. And then you imagine a house or a building, something that you know very well, and you take those parts and you store them in different rooms. So you put your intro in the kitchen and your conclusion somewhere. And then when you get up to give the presentation, you mentally go through that space, and those things are stored there for you, instead of free-floating in your mind where they may get buried under something or they're out of order or whatever. It's the only trick to it is you can't, if you're talking, you can't go, you know, like that. You have to smoothly walk through the house with anybody knowing you're doing that. But anyway, I thought that was very interesting. I like the idea of the memory palace. And so as I thought about that, I thought last semester when I did the J.G. Ballard High Rise, I also simultaneously reread Gaston Bachelard's The Poetics of Space. And I thought maybe I could shove Bachelard and Ballard together, but Ballard wouldn't have it. So I'm going to shove Emily Bronte there instead. And Bachelard is sort of memory palace adjacent, and I'm going to kind of greatly reduce and simplify Bachelard when I talk about him. So if you are a Bachelard scholar, I'm apologizing to you. I'm really sorry for doing this. So the way Gaston Bachelard, The Poetics of Space, it's a kind of elaboration, again, on the memory palace. So for him, a house is an objective thing. It's an object. It's a house. We get it. We can see it. We can walk into it. But it also has an internal existence. That is, it's made up of all the dreams and the memories and the consciousnesses of everyone who has inhabited it. These form an idea of home that we, the former inhabitants, then take with us into the greater outside world. As with the memory palace thing, memories or dreams or our consciousnesses live or are stored in different parts of the house or in its furniture or in its objects. When we recall a memory of home or events that have taken place there, it's these rooms and things that we bring up. And they often have more meaning and more clarity than the dates in which they occurred, which you might not be able to bring up in your head. Just lost my way in here, which is really weird. Hang on, sorry. Technology. This is that same house. It's the ruins of it, which I liked a lot. Okay, here we go. There he is. There's Gaston himself. It's not only the memories, events, or people that make the home, but it's also the memory of all the selves that you've been in that home, that maybe, and that you've left there in the relation to that space and those things. We, or the selves, are housed there in those memories. Bachelard says, does he say it? He does. He says, memories are motionless, and the more secure they are fixed in space, the sounder they are, which I think is very true. Also, and importantly, as we're discussing a novel, not a real house, these memories for poets, but I think for ordinary people as well, are transformed into poetic images. They're lifted out of the ordinary. They become full of multiple meanings, evocative on many levels. By shaping and reshaping these rooms and things in our minds, memory is also shaped and enhanced. Memory and fiction are, if not interchangeable, at least sisters. The poetic image can become metaphor in our most intimate spaces, the house and the imagination. Okay, so to get to Wuthering Heights, it has a very small cast of characters. They inhabit two houses, Wuthering Heights and the Grange, through two generations and endless reiterations of names and events and scenes, etc. Because of time, I'm only going to stick with the Heights, the main house, and the characters of Catherine, who is called Kathy, and Heathcliff, and the housekeeper Nellie, who is the primary narrator because she's the keeper of the house. So the story is often described, you'll see this all the time, as a Chinese box narrative, meaning one narration opens on to the next, so the reader finds and builds the larger story through the various tellings of story. I like that as a very concrete sort of metaphor, the idea of opening boxes and finding story inside of them. It works nicely in what I'm talking about. Similarly, in this novel, the reader locates the emotions and traces of the characters through physical markers, the furniture and objects in the house, memory places, if you will. We read and see a piece of furniture or a room, and we remember or we associate it with an incident or a character. As Bachelard says, hopefully, past, present, and future give the house different dynamisms, which often interfere, at times opposing, at others stimulating one another. This is definitely at work in this novel, in these two generations, as they inhabit this house and leave themselves all over it. So I'm going to take you to a couple of rooms and through some of these objects, some of the furniture in these rooms. This is, actually, I'm going to the house first, sorry. This is actually thought to be the model for the Heights. It looks a little grand, but it's fairly rustic when you look at it. So it opens with a buffoonish, kind of bumbling narrator. He's an outsider. He comes to the Heights, and he immediately misapprehends everything he sees, from the house to the contents to the people living there. So the Heights is a country home. It's a working farm. We're told it's called Wuthering Heights for weathering, and there you go, is a provincial adjective descriptive of the atmospheric tumult to which its station is exposed in stormy weather. The architects have built it strong, the narrow windows are deeply set in the wall, and the corners defended with large jutting stones. That about sums up the entire story, basically. So again, it's a very homely novel. It's filled with the most detailed description of the furniture and objects, but they're not incidental descriptions. These things become part of the action, part of the story. Their presence is necessary. The characters, as with the Memory Palace and in Bachelard, suffuse them with meaning and memory through the combination of their behaviors and their emotions. Later, these things will become talismanic for them in memory, markers and placeholders of a lost past that often, confusingly, bleeds into their presence. And because of the lingering detailed descriptions of these things, these objects, the furniture, the reader, too, starts placing memories, noting their locations, and is able to cross back and forth through time. We get an idea of this house, this home, and what it has meant to its inhabitants, and so have sort of false memories, because we have mapped our own memories of textual events, and possibly even conflated them with memories of our own past, onto the poetic images of the text as if they are our own. And so we become more attached, and we are less outside of the story. So now we're going to go into the rooms of the house. We're going to the kitchen right now. Here we go. Here's the hearth. So these are 18th century hearths. The Heights would have had a grander hearth, but I wanted you to see the settle that is next to them and the hearth. So the hearth in this house is the beating heart of the kitchen. The fire is lit in all seasons. It's the place that the narrator is brought to first, and so to the reader. As the story develops, we return again and again to see characters standing in front of the hearth. One of the novel's most famous scenes, where Catherine Earnshaw proclaims to Nellie, the housekeeper, "Nellie, I am Heathcliff." It's very romantic. It takes place here. The twist is that just before Kathy utters the "I am Heathcliff" line, she also says, "It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff." Unbeknownst to her, Heathcliff is standing out of sight, but not out of hearing, behind the settle, which is very tall, and he slips out after the "degrade me" part, and so he never hears the rest. Later in the novel, after Heathcliff owns the house and Catherine is gone, we see a tormented, unhappy Heathcliff standing in front of the same hearth next to the same settle, and as readers we remember. We see as a sort of trick of the mind the young, rejected, heartbroken Heathcliff, full of pain and anguish. And I would argue that we then forgive the man who in the current iteration of the narrative is standing in exactly the same place and who is behaving cruelly, and we give him a pass and a bit of grace because we have that past memory picture to stand next to it. Also in the same kitchen, there is an enormous wooden dresser, not in the American sense of thing you put your clothes in, but in the English sense of where you put dishes. It's floor to ceiling. There's racks of gleaming dishes and tankards, and there's guns. There's all kinds of stuff going on in this thing. But it's the underneath that's important in the narrative, because underneath there is, as the narrator tells us, an arch, where reposes, this is a quote, where reposed a huge liver-colored bitch pointer surrounded by a swarm of squealing puppies. Later, in a different, out-of-sequence narrative box, we see Kathy and Heathcliff as children, quote, as snug as our means allowed in the arch of the dresser. They're hiding from Kathy's vindictive brother, they're dragged out, and they're punished. As readers, we overlay this picture memory of the hidden children in the arch on top of the one we have seen or read of the dogs in the same arch we were given earlier, and we feel warmly towards these lost puppy children, whose fate we don't know yet, and we also are reminded of how far this house has fallen in the present of the story. No children, just dogs. Let's go to the bedroom. Here we go. So, this is the box bed. If you've ever read this novel, the one thing you're going to remember is the thing that happens in this bed. It's not what you think. I mean, although that could be subtextual, we don't really know. Anyway, so moving into the bedroom. So this room's not a traditional bedroom in our sense of the bedroom. It's the box bed was used because it would allow multiple use in the room and a little bit of privacy. This bed actually is really thought to be a bed that she had seen. She'd been in this house several times, and the bed is still extant. So it's unusual in that the box is built around a window, and it has panels so that the sleeper can close themselves off inside of it. In the present of the novel, the bumbling narrator is brought here mistakenly, that is, without Heathcliff's permission to sleep. In this nook and in this niche, he finds the books of the deceased Catherine, and her various names are carved into the windowsill. He also discovers her diary, which she has scribbled over the text of one of her books. I think it's her Bible. He reads this to himself, but of course, he's reading it to us. And it so gives us layers and history to the story. The book, her book, an object, was a hiding place for Catherine, a place to stash written memory, and a voice for possibly her later future selves, and of course the reader. It's a great, I think, literalization of the memory place sort of idea. Her writings date from 20 years previous to the present of the narration. The narrator, he nods off while he's reading, only to be awakened to this is the part you always remember, awakened to the sound of what he thinks are branches on the window. He thrusts his hand through the glass. Honest to God, he puts his hand through the glass window. Utters the line made famous by Kate Bush. And you can sing this in a very, very high voice if you know what I'm talking about. I'm Kathy, I've come home, let me in the window. The boundary between the past, this is the ghost. This is Kathy's ghost. She's wailing to the narrator that she's been outside for 20 years. The boundary between the past and the present life and the memories of the house has been breached. Interestingly, in his fear, the narrator piles up Kathy's books against the broken window, sort of taunting her with her own things. If this isn't enough, Heathcliff, hearing the narrator scream, he rushes in, he climbs into this bed, and he begins to sob and cry out to Catherine, come in, haunt me. The present is now reaching into the past, as the past was reaching into the future. Later, as the story continues in its really strange roundabout history, we find Kathy as an unhappy wife living in another house that is not in the Heights anymore. She's awakened from a fever dream caused by her refusal to eat. She tells Nellie, I thought as I lay there, my eyes dimly discerning the gray of the window, that I was enclosed in the oak-paneled bed at home, and my heart ached with some grief I could not recall. Note the same window we saw her begging at earlier and her use of enclosed, safe in the place of memory. She's supposed to be home, but she's not. We get that her spirit, alive or dead, we don't know, will not rest outside of her home. So we begin to understand the layers of the house and the memories that are stored there. We also understand that memories and consciousness, ghosts, or what you want to call them, don't follow chronology. They are stored and excavated and arranged as you need them to understand story and character. The box bed will later surface for the attentive reader as an analog to Kathy's grave and coffin, where Heathcliff again attempts to collapse time and climb in with her. Later still, Heathcliff dies in this bed after a hunger strike, because Brontes love nothing better than hunger strikes. This is so true. And he's found with the window wide open and the rain is streaming down his face, and he's ecstatic. Apparently, after failing to bring her in, he goes out to join her. The bed is a kind of portal which character and reader can slip the limits of chronology. So, Wuthering Heights is presented very much, it's a solid house, it's a real house, it's an object in the Bachelardian sense, but of course it's not, it's fictional. It's also a memory palace for both the characters and the reader. It's a great repository for memories of love and hatred, sad childhoods, happy and sad brides, dogs and people, the living and the dead, the really strange eternal return in this book of characters and events, etc., all attach us to the house and its contents as if it is our own. In every iteration, we return and we see, we remember, and so we know it. Here's Bachelard again. A house that's been experienced is not an inert box. Inhabited space transcends geometrical space. At the end of the novel, we hear that the Heights is to be shut up, except for the kitchen, where the fire will be kept going by the servant Joseph. We also know that Kathy and Heathcliff walk on the moor. They're actually dead. They're ghosts. And if we are literary or romantic enough, we know they're going to find their way back to the hearth and home. So to wind up, I want to return to Emily Bronte herself. And this is her home, Haworth Parsonage in Yorkshire. She was devoted to home. She was very much a homebody. At one point, she left. She only left her house, I think, twice. I mean, not to go to the store, but I mean to a distance. She's not Emily Dickinson, this is Emily Bronte. Who I also love and respect. At one point, she went to Belgium with her sister Charlotte to teach. It was for less than a year, and she pined for home to the point of sickness. And she went home, and she never left again. She died a really slow and painful death in Haworth at the age of 30, tuberculosis. As children, the Bronte siblings created and wrote these long and involved stories, these little tiny books that were just completely filled up. This went on long into their late teens before they wrote the novels, where they would walk around, people saw them doing this, as they did chores in the house or walked on the moor, reciting these stories out loud to each other, basically sort of writing them out loud. She wrote her stories while she polished, and she scrubbed and baked and sewed and fed the dogs. Bachelard, by the way, has this great writing about housework and objects and housework. It's very interesting. I tried to wedge it in here, but I couldn't. What I find so interesting here is the blending of Bronte's inner creative life and her domestic life, her external and internal lives. In her few surviving letters and diaries, she often moves from a description of, say, peeling a potato to the goings-on in Gondel, which is her imaginary literary kingdom, with no transition, with no comment, no boundaries between them. They just completely overlap each other. Why this is interesting to me is because in the novel Wuthering Heights, we see this same overlap of action and loving domestic detail. We also see the possible recreations, the memories of houses and rooms and furniture that Bronte actually visited and deposited or stashed in Wuthering Heights, as I was showing you with the other slides. To return to Bachelard, he writes beautifully about poets. There's beautiful sections, and he talks about their word houses. And he says, the poet lives in a daydream that is awake, but above all, his daydream remains in the world, facing worldly things. It gathers the universe together around and in an object, which I think is painfully beautiful, right? The universe in an object. And so I wonder, when I think about this, if for fierce and brilliant and daydreaming poet and lover of home, Emily Bronte, that Wuthering Heights, even though it's fictional, as all memory is, made in Wuthering Heights her own memory palace, the place where the real and the imagined, her doubled selves that she carried so easily and simultaneously, could live in harmony. And further, by not keeping this to herself, but by transforming her memories and feelings about home and its things into poetic figures and creating or housing them in this object, the novel, we in turn share something, a home that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And this is the end of Bachelard. Memories of the outside world will never have the same tonality as those of home. And by recalling these memories, we add to our store of dreams. The space we love is unwilling to remain permanently enclosed. It deploys and appears to move elsewhere without difficulty into other times and onto different planes of dream and memory. Thank you. Yeah.
So before I begin, I'd just like to say a couple things. First, thank you to Brian for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. I haven't given a talk here, I think, since 2022, when we did our fantastic course on the ocean, the seafaring class, and the ocean and the imagination. And then secondly, I just want to say it's interesting, like Professor Smith and I did not coordinate our talks, but we didn't need to, because everything we're going to speak about, or everything I'm going to speak about, is going to double and really just kind of dive into that, I think, a little bit more, right? We're on the same level. We all are. Yeah. It's the English crew tonight, you get. Whether it's the real or the imagined home, whether it's memory imposed upon a home, I think it's very important that we're speaking all about this in these very interesting, I think, metaphorical ways. So, the topic of my talk tonight, as you can tell, is Fun Home, a family tragic comic. It's a great graphic novel, a great comic book, I suppose you could say, by Alison Bechdel. And I'll say more about this in a second. I just want to say something about why it's so important to me. One, it's just a foundational text in the study of graphic novels. It's a foundational text, I think, because it breaks so many barriers, so many boundaries of what a graphic novel could do. You might be familiar with Mouse by Art Spiegelman. You might be familiar with Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. These are both precursors of what she's doing. And she's definitely working in that same vein. But she's also breaking many, I think, norms in comic books. And she has been for a great long time. Okay, so I'm really so thankful that you're here for the talk today. Thank you. My name is Jason Crum. Thank you for being here. The title page to Chapter 1 of Alison Bechdel's Fun Home encapsulates almost all of her concerns in the whole of the text. She presents her father, here, Bruce, standing proudly in front of his manicured craftsman home. Old father, old artificer, she calls him, referencing both the cautionary myth of Daedalus and Icarus and the famous last lines of James Joyce's 1916 novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Old father, old artificer, Stephen exclaims at the end, stand me now and ever in good stead. Bechdel's father is situated in front of the family home. He proudly and shirtlessly poses in front of his passion project, a 19th century Victorian in rural Pennsylvania. The drawing is, as is all of the artwork and dialogue in the memoir, from Bechdel herself, drawing from memory and family photographs, which I'll show you a few. So here then we have three concerns. The home as a manicured space to present identity, a mythic underpinning of a postmodern search for one's own home, and the home as a place to remake or rethink memory and possibly, maybe repair the past. First, some context. Alison Bechdel was born in 1960 to Bruce and Helen Bechdel. She started her career in comics as the author of the strip Dykes to Watch Out For. Yeah. In this comic that ran from 1983 to 2008, Bechdel sought to give voice and visual presence to her queer friends and community. From this, of course, we get the infamous Bechdel test, which is a way of looking at media, pop culture, to see if it shows certain women talking to each other without having to reference men. She has numerous offerings, Bechdel does, including her 2012 memoir, Are You My Mother?, detailing her relationship with her mother, of course. Her 2021 memoir, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, chronicling her fascination with the body and physical fitness. And her recent 2025 novel, Spent, which fictionalizes her life on a Vermont pygmy goat sanctuary. Sounds wonderful to read there. It's her graphic novel, however, or her graphic memoir, Fun Home, a family tragic comic that strokes my curiosity today. Published in 2006, the book won numerous awards at the time. It was named Time Magazine's Book of the Year, not Comic Book of the Year, not Graphic Novel of the Year, Book of the Year. It won the Stonewall Book Award that year, and it's won many Eisner Awards for its achievement in comics. It also was made into a musical in 2013. You've heard it. It's a very good musical. It's not as good as some of these top-tier musicals like Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera, but it's still a very good musical, I have to say. Okay, so please look that up. The text shows a 45-year-old Alison writing about her childhood family home in rural Pennsylvania and her relationship with her father, Bruce, seen here looking effortlessly cool. We follow Alison, her mother and her father, and her two brothers as they live in their family home. Through the winding and non-linear narrative, Bechdel contrasts her childhood rebellions against gender norms with her late teenage struggles to find and establish her own identity. You see this very early in the novel as she poses in front of the house with her father, again juxtaposing herself and her father. I hate flowers, as he gives her sort of lessons on it. She wonders, what kind of a man but a sissy could possibly love flowers this ardently? And then again, giving us kind of a peek into it, Allison right here is minuscule by the stature of the house. Our home was an efflorescence of bulbs, buds, and blooms. I love the alliteration there. Flowers, wild and cultivated, native and imported, flowering vines and trees. All of this is overshadowed by her relationship with her father, who she tells us early in the novel had numerous physical and emotional affairs with men. The memoir is named Fun Home as a double entendre. Her father taught English at the local high school and in spare moments operated the family's funeral home, which they called the Fun Home. Okay? I also suspect, however, that the title Fun Home is in reference to the times that they lived in this house. The whole of the novel really looks back to Allison's time with her father in this house, and I believe she's trying to create that sense of fun and that connection that she had. She even dedicates the novel, "We did have a lot of fun in spite of everything." Okay? But firstly, let's get to the house, because it is an actual house. Okay? Here, this is Bechdel's family home in rural Pennsylvania, 19th century Victorian, two-story. You can see the lush foliage that her father has planted here. Okay? I'm going to go through just a few just to sort of establish what it looks like. Here we see the home drawn by Bechdel. So if you look in the top left right here, this is the front of the house, the same house that we see right here. So drawing this both from memory and drawing it from family pictures. Okay. Important here that she says at the young age, it's just a house, right? She'll come to sort of think about that, I think, as the novel goes on. Okay. Excuse me. Here we see the interior of the house, right? Bechdel shows us the study. We have a lamp of Mephistopheles, a lamp of Don Quixote, some flocked walls, gilded dressings, velvet drapes. And she says here, "And if my father liked to imagine himself as a 19th century aristocrat overseeing his estate from behind the leather-topped mahogany, did that require such a leap of the imagination? Perhaps affectation can be so thoroughgoing, so authentic in its details, that it stops being pretense," right? So that is to say, she's trying to say that her father is putting himself into this house, hopefully as I'll show here in a second, right? We can see this in the outside as well, right? My father could spin garbage into gold. He could transfigure a room with a smallish offhand flourish, conjure an entire finished period interior from a paint chip. I love the word conjure here. She uses that a few times, almost as if her father is a magician or making something out of nothing, perhaps like Daedalus. All right. As I said earlier, Bechdel is working both from memory and family pictures. And in fact, here we see one of the family pictures she's posted on her blog, and the recreation of it in the panel in the comic book. Okay, you can see the decorations, the decor that her father has renovated, has created in the home, with the way that Bechdel writes it right here, framing her father in the center, creating this slightly perfect scene for us. Right. One of my favorite panels in the novel, in fact, is this, where Bechdel shows us something perhaps a lot of us can relate to. Many different rooms in a house, many different people doing their own different things. Her brother playing with airplanes, her other brother playing with guitar, Allison drawing right here, her mother at the piano, and her father fixing frames right here. Okay? So it's a home, just like many others this place is. They live, they work, they rest, they love, they fight, they relax, they learn, they play, all in this home. Okay? So after quickly establishing the home as a family space, Bechdel turns to describe the home as her father's passion project. Okay? Here, this is seen as Bruce himself carries what can only be described as a cross, and is said to be libidinal, manic, and martyred. Framing him strictly in front of the house. This is backlit, right? So she does this to show that this house is really an expression of her father. Now it's here that I think the home takes a kind of a different feel in the novel. It becomes a manicured space to present identity. right? For context, like I said earlier, Bechdel discovers from her mother, later in her teenage years, that her father has been having physical and emotional relationships with men. Though she doesn't know how he identified, she claims him as gay. She wants to claim him as gay because she says this gives her own sexuality some kind of foundation, some undergirding. She posits that the home, then, is a sort of surrogate space for her father to present a kind of queer domesticity. Right? She even wonders, in fact, in certain panels, right, about how real all of this was. Right? For example, right here in the bottom panel, the family picture that we've all seen, many of us have taken. He used this skillful artifice, again, artifice, not to make things, but to make things appear to be what they were not. Or we can see this here, where Bechdel describes a family memory in front of a Christmas tree, right? I think my father actually enjoyed having a family sometimes, or at least the air of authenticity we lent to his exhibit, sort of still life with children. Definitely something I can relate to, right? So, pardon me here, still life with children, yeah. Let me just read this. So for some theory, I'd like to bring in Christopher Reed, who's a fantastic writer on queer domesticity, and his analysis specifically of queer space in the built environment. And he writes, another subtle element of queer space is its engagement with the past. From San Francisco to South Beach, Victorian or modern, former fishing village or industrial zone, queer space is renovated space. Page there. More than simply a question of style, renovation is a process of taking place, emphasis mine, okay, of taking and seizing it, often by opening smaller spaces into larger ones, whether on the scale of the room, pocket park, the plaza. The obvious metaphors, again, knocking down barriers, opening up closets, are very, very important and clear. I think Bechdel shows this renovation and taking, like seizing of place throughout the novel. There are many places I could point to, but I just have a few I'd like to show here. We can see this here when Bechdel gives us a very stark image. Her father in the family room arranging the flowers, cleaning things up. Bechdel here watching The Rifleman, a great 1950s Western TV show in the States, comparing the two of them, right? She even says, I sensed a chink in my family's armor, an undefended gap in the circle of our wagons. So even thinking of her family as if it's that Western, that rugged Western individualist. Or we might see this here, as Bechdel shows her father and her playing, but then her father stopping to clean. We can see this also. His greatest achievement, arguably, was his monomaniacal restoration of our old house. Get me the tack hammer and strip of molding is loose. The artwork is interesting here. I'll just point it out. Notice how the work to be done is framed in the center. Bechdel and her father are both kind of framing it on either side. Okay. Or we can see this here in the outside, the garden of the house, where Bechdel shows us just the lush foliage that her father would manipulate. He could cultivate the barren yard into a lush flowering landscape, she says. He could manipulate flagstones and the thinnest quivering layers of gold leaf. Okay. So she certainly does try to make the case that to her father, the home is a bounded space, right? A bounded and protected space, I think. That is to say, the home is not the outside world. She does this so much in the novel, and again, I can only show you a few here. She contrasts the home and the space of it with the other surrounding parts of her rural environment. She does this through many maps of different parts of Pennsylvania. See right here, we see the Allegheny Front right here, the ridge and the valley, she says, talking about certain Appalachian trails, natural barriers, natural boundaries, even showing what I think is a kind of a typical Midwestern life, all in a 10-mile radius, born, lived, died, buried, right there, okay? She wonders about this, Bechdel does. She wonders, how would my life be any different? Or how would my father's life be any different had he grown up in a different place, had he grown up in New York City, where they liked to live and visit different parts of? Okay. So, if the home is this space for Bruce, what about to Allison? I'd like to propose that we read the home as a place that young Allison juxtaposes herself with her father. Okay? And indeed, in this scene right here, you can see she even contests what she calls her father's, quote, Nelly. She says, I was Spartan to his Athenian, modern to his Victorian, butch to his Nelly, utilitarian to his aesthete. We should note also the frustration I think Allison has with the home here, dirtying it up, playing army guy here, okay? Polishing it very, very reluctantly. Or we could see this here when occupying the same space, right? The juxtaposition of the two of them in the family's library is very stark, almost as if it's obviously a scene, the perspective is from outside, but we're seeing this as if it's a wall between the two of them doing their similar things. Or lastly, we can see this right here in the family's large living room mirror, where she posits, quote, "I was trying to compensate for something unmanly in him, and he was attempting to express something feminine through me." So we have this masc and femme tug of war playing out in her childhood that she posits here, I think, in the book, right? She shows throughout the novel, though, that the home for her is a space of gendered play. And in this scene right here, in the middle parts of the novel, she says, "I had recently discovered some of Dad's old clothes. Putting on the formal shirts with its studs and cufflinks was a nearly mystical experience." This is contrasted a little bit later in the novel in a different home space for her. This is to say, her college dorm room, right? This is Bechdel in her dorm room. She says, "My researches were stimulating but solitary." She even says a little bit later that she sat at the Gay Student Union and observed in petrified silence. Okay? So hopefully we can see then that the home is definitely a sort of a real lived space and a bounded, contested domestic space. Okay? So what are we to make then of the novel's underpinning of the myth of Daedalus and Icarus? Or what of Homer's Odyssey that she mentions? What of James Joyce's Ulysses, a great novel from 1922? Okay. Again, Bechdel calls Bruce, at the very beginning of the novel, old father, old artificer. What does this have to do with the home? So I think we should remember that it's the journey home, and in fact the search for a home, that animates Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus in James Joyce's Ulysses. Okay, just as it animates Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey, seen here, played by Matt Damon in the forthcoming Christopher Nolan film. Oh, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. He's always getting lost. Somebody give him a GPS phone or something. In the bottom right, or the right-hand panel, you can see a map of Bloom's and Daedalus's wanderings in Ulysses. This is drawn by Vladimir Nabokov to help him through James Joyce's book. All right. So as you can see through just the map right here, there are very few scenes actually in the home in that novel, in Ulysses by James Joyce. The story begins in Stephen's apartment and ends in Leopold's home on number 7 Eccles Street. But the main thrust shows the wanderings of Stephen and Leopold throughout a single day in Dublin on June 16, 1904. Okay. Bechdel clearly connects her father to Daedalus and Icarus in the memoir. Right? Seen here, they're playing what she calls carrion games, what they call them in the circus. Bechdel gives us a sort of a point of view, a third-person point of view over her shoulder, looking down at her father, again, giving her father back his own subjectivity and bringing him back to life, and framed by this artisan rug. Okay? Or we can see this here, where she's again arguing with him about doing work to renovate the house, and she says only, "If my father was Icarus, he was also Daedalus." Right? That skillful artificer, the mad scientist who built the wings for his son, designed the famous labyrinth, and who answered not to the laws of society, but to those of his craft. Okay? So again, laws of society, the laws of craft in the house. Okay? I want to propose that just as Joyce used Homer's Odyssey to give mythic structure to the dizzying search for identity in modernity in 1922, so Bechdel uses Joyce as a structure for her own wanderings and seeking of a father and a home. At the conclusion of Ulysses, Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus finally meet. They have both left home early and they have wandered Dublin all day. Right? Young Stephen looking for a spiritual, artistic father. Leopold still forlorn over the loss of his son years earlier. In the penultimate episode, Ithaca, Leopold brings Stephen to his home for a talk and a cup of cocoa. They gaze around the kitchen and both notice mundane items like stockings, plates, cups, just assorted household goods. I should say also this section of Ulysses is written in a sort of Socratic dialogue. It's always a question and then a very, very just just rote answer. What does Stephen see? Well, under a row of 5 coiled spring house bells, a curvilinear rope stretched between 2 holdfasts athwart across the recess, a lady's gray hose with little suspender tops, just cataloging what's there, right? Pardon me here. I'm sorry, pardon me. To Joyce, the home is a place of items, items to be described and cataloged. Okay. Let's say this. It is also a place of secrets. Bloom's wife, Molly, has had several affairs in the home. If you read the novel, you know what I'm talking about. It's also the place of bodily functions. This is what it was banned for when it first came out. Here, Joyce infamously details Leopold Bloom defecating early in the novel. Right? Brian, I put that in just for you. Just to let you know. Right? So, yes, this is what the home is. This is what the home is to James Joyce. But like Bechdel, there is more to this home. After their conversation, Bloom asks Stephen if he would like to stay at his home that night. Okay? Again, in a very circulatory way. Would you like to stay here? What would you gain from this? Right? Stephen answers in the negative. Bloom then proposes they meet in the future for Italian lessons, vocal coaching, and intellectual dialogues. Okay? Pardon me here. Yeah. Upon being turned down, Leopold Bloom immediately falls into a depression. He quotes or cites the irreparability of the past. What is this? Well, the pain of loss that he has suffered. Leopold's son, Rudolph, has died in infancy years earlier, a loss that he and his wife, Molly, find irreparable. So, the irreparability of the past. At this point, Stephen and Leopold step outside. They pee in the home's garden. They stargaze, they shake hands, and they quietly part. Right? There's no triumphant coming together here in the home. Only items, detached conversations, secrets, and loss. So, undoubtedly aware of Joyce's concept of this irreparability of the past, Bechdel details her own failed attempt at connecting with her father. This emotional heart of the novel occurs in a car trip where Allison, in her late teens and home from college, confronts her father about his and her sexuality. The 12-panel per page structure breaks each sentence or thought into a very pregnant moment here between the two. Bruce's heartfelt statements about sexuality, it should strike us. His first queer sexual experience, he says, at the age of 14, occurred at his father's funeral home, or the fun home. The second, in college, he says, the 2 places that Bechdel has singled out as places of, as spaces of safety. Bechdel even writes, it was not the sobbing, joyous reunion of Odysseus and Telemachus. It was more like fatherless Stephen and sonless Bloom having their equivocal late-night cocoa at 7 Eccles Street. So she gives it a certain mythical weight and literary weight to her own wanderings here, we can see. Right? Still, she returns to this. She returns to this mythic underpinning at the end of the novel. Okay? She takes us back in the last chapter to a memory of hers via a family photograph. The title page of the last chapter shows a picture taken by her mother. Right? Allison, about 8 years old, jumping into the pool while her father waits with open arms to catch her. The final page of the novel, though, and we've gone 45 pages in between the left and the right. The final page of the novel, though, inverts this perspective, right? And instead shows us not a picture, but a third-person over-the-shoulder perspective of the same event, Allison's memory. Right? Allison leaping into the home's pool, her father ready to catch her, his face locked onto Allison's. So the memoir ends, let's say the whole book ends just as it begins, right? With a photo-captured event compared to Allison's own memory in the home. At the end of it all, she asks, what if Icarus hadn't hurtled into the sea? What if he had inherited his father's inventive bent? What might he have wrought? Right? So here she imagines, I think, herself as Icarus, jumping into her father's arms. And if so, perhaps we can read her memoir, Fun Home, as what she has wrought. And so the home in this sense is a place for Bechdel to recreate her father's life, his passion, his identity, all as a way to claim him not just as a paternal father, I think, but as a spiritual one, Bechdel takes this search for a spiritual father so far as to dress up as her father in the family home and take pictures of herself in poses she remembers. Right? This is when she was working on the novel herself. She dressed up in her father's clothes, took framing pictures, and drew them. This is a panel from the actual book itself. Right? So unlike Leopold Bloom and perhaps James Joyce, Bechdel does see a repairability, I think, in the past. The literary home helps think through the detritus of her childhood and her teenage years, and to ponder her and her father's sexuality as bounded by different times and places. It's a place for her simply to be, to reflect, and to flee, yes, but to return in memory in an attempt to repair. Or, like she says, perhaps it's just a house. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jason and Lisa. Those were great. Both your talks made me want to reread those books immediately with those in mind, so it was really wonderful. Can you hear me okay in the back? Thank you so much to Brian for the series and for inviting me to be a part of it, and to being open to me reading from some work in progress, from a novel that I am getting close to finishing. The idea of home for me is so much, has been for the past few years, so much the home in this particular novel that is about one house embedded in one town and one community, which it's part of, but also not part of, that it's hard for me to think about home in any other way right now. So I'm really grateful to get to share an excerpt of this with all of you. I was also thinking about the quote Brian shared with us a couple weeks ago from T.S. Eliot, that home is where we start from. And when he said that, I also thought about how home sometimes follows us as well and haunts us a little bit, like these ghosts, and maybe doesn't stop haunting some of us fiction writers until we turn around and look at it and get all the details down. So this is the first 7 pages of this novel, which is about 276 right now, and it's called Fatherland. And just as a quick audience participation move, who here has been to Stanford campus ever? I know Beth has because I asked her recently. Okay, all right. One weekend a month, the entire family drove to Stanford campus, 2 blocks from their house, so the father could harvest the tall grass growing under the oaks and eucalyptus. He used a scythe, as had the peasant men he'd helped in the fields of Poland as a boy, cutting rye before the war. Now he swung the scythe across the street from Town and Country Village Mall and the high school with the Spanish tile roof, 6 lanes of El Camino Real traffic streaming past. The children and their mother followed him, raking felled grass into neat piles. There was no rake small enough for the youngest child, the baby of the family. Instead, Therese gathered clumps of cut grass in her tiny arms and stumbled toward the one great pile forming beside the rusted pink Buick, a 55 Special, whose back seat their father removed for these trips. When he finished the harvest, they piled as much grass as they could fit into the trunk and the hollowed-out back seat. Therese's brother Whit sat between their mother and father in the front. Therese and her older sisters, Dot and Bee, climbed onto the grass in the back seat and held onto the rope strung across the front seat so they would not topple into each other on the turns. That was the fun part. The grass was for the rabbits, which they kept in hutches behind the garage. The rabbits had begun at the request of Therese's older siblings before she was born, cute bunnies to play with at Easter. Their father had indulged the request, but it was hard for Therese to imagine. Their father was not the indulgent sort. Maybe he'd agreed because he'd grown up on a farm, like their mother, where animals were also meat, or because he had had a Polish acquaintance in San Mateo with a rabbit connection. The acquaintance had given him a pair, male and female. The children named them, Bugs Bunny and Mrs. Bugs. Of course, the rabbits made other rabbits. When new rabbits were born, they had to be removed from the mother's hutch. She might eat them. It terrified Therese to hear this. She could not reconcile that possibility with the idea of her own mother, who rocked her and held her and soothed her, never, ever trying to eat her. She could not, in fact, quite believe it could happen. And years later, as an adult, she would wonder if it was really true or something her father had said only to scare her. There were constantly new rabbits, so many new rabbits they couldn't harvest enough grass. Once a month, their father took one rabbit into the garage and yelled at the children to stay away, though he made their mother go in there to help him. They shut the door, and terrible screams emerged, high-pitched and desperate. He was wringing the rabbit's neck. How can he? Therese asked her mother once. It was so confusing to her. Even as little as she was, she knew that her father had survived the camps, though he didn't call them that. He used the Polish word obóz. One camp was an obóz, but multiple camps were obozy. Her father had been not in one obóz, but in many obozy during the war, and many people had suffered and died there. How could he kill anything after the obozy, she wondered. He hates doing it, her mother said. You have no idea how much he hates it. Therese still didn't understand. If he hated it, why did he have to? Why couldn't he just free one rabbit a month at the edge of Stanford campus where they harvested grass? But she felt sorry for her father on rabbit killing weekends after that. He didn't want to kill those rabbits any more than she did. He just didn't know how not to. Their father froze the rabbit meat in the deep, top-opening, ancient freezer in the basement, coffin-sized, the kind of freezer where police detectives might find the serial killer's victims hacked to bits. As an adult, Therese still shuddered every time she saw the freezer when she visited that old house. Of course there wouldn't still be meat in there, but she could remember the frozen flesh from peeking in there as a child. Those striated haunches piled high in frosty, clear plastic bags. From time to time, their father ordered their mother to boil some rabbit. It was a crime to waste food, especially meat. He ate it for dinner that night while the rest of them ate chicken or pork chops, whatever their mother cooked for them. He did not make them eat rabbit. That was one good thing Therese could say about him. Whatever happened to the rabbits? Therese sometimes wonders as an adult. One day they had them, then one day they were gone. She was still little when they disappeared. Had their father finally gotten tired of the monthly killing and just killed them all in one epic slaughter in the garage? If she had ever known, she had forgotten. Her eldest sister Dot once said, "At least he never killed bugs." Bugs, the ur-rabbit, the paterfamilias, was allowed to die of old age in his hutch. Therese did not think until much later to ask, what about Mrs. Bugs? The other reason they went to Stanford campus on Sundays in the fall after football games was to collect cans. They knew it was game day because all the fans parked in their neighborhood so as not to pay parking at the stadium. They streamed toward campus in their red t-shirts and caps, carrying their foam bleacher pads and umbrellas and jackets if the sky was gray. Therese heard the roar of the crowd, the faint voice of the announcer. When the fans trickled back to their cars, she knew the game had ended. Then she and her parents and siblings got in the Buick and drove right up to the entrance of the stadium. No one cared now that the game was over. They fanned out, each taking a section. Though Therese was too little to be alone in her own section, she got to help a sister. They gathered all the empty aluminum cans in big plastic trash bags they dragged up and down the rows of bleachers. Sometimes they found full cans of soda or beer, and they put those in a separate bag. Their parents would get the beer. Their mother and father would share a can, emptied into a saucepan and heated with a spoonful of sugar. It is totally as disgusting as it sounds. Sometimes they found unopened candy bars, intact bags of chips, sometimes sweaters, jackets. Her father took the sweaters if they were good quality, 100% lamb's wool, never acrylic, to send to his brothers in Poland. Once they found an umbrella, the biggest umbrella Therese had ever seen. It had a sturdy, polished wood handle and was printed with 1,000 tiny red S's on its beige dome. They had that umbrella for years. Their best umbrella, huge. You could fit 3 people under it, and everyone stayed dry, and it never inverted in the wind. It lived in the narrow cupboard in the laundry room with the brooms and mops and dustpan. Outside the stadium, they loaded the trunk of the Buick with so many bags they couldn't close it. They drove home that way, the trunk lid cocked. That night, Dot and Bee would set the cans in long, even rows in the garage while their brother followed with the mallet, pounding each can neatly into a disc. Therese followed him, gathering the crushed cans into one of the emptied garbage bags. They went late into the night, as late as their father would let them, though Therese always had to go in first. She'd hear the pounding and the crushing and the laughing from the garage as she knelt by her mother, elbows on the mattress of the bed they shared, to whisper the Our Father, and she wished she could still be out there, where the fun was. A few times a year, their father drove them to the recycling station at the dump with all the bags of crushed cans to exchange for money. Her brother and sisters saved it all up until they could afford 3 pairs of roller skates with yellow rubber stoppers at the Palo Alto Sports Shop on Waverly Avenue. They all bought them a few sizes too big and wadded socks into the toes of the boots so their feet wouldn't slip around. They could still wear them years later when they got to college, 2 hours away in the Central Valley. They would glide and race the concrete paths of that flat campus on roller skates paid for with crushed cans. Therese was still too little for roller skates when they got theirs, but her siblings promised she'd get a pair someday too. They'd persuade their father to buy them for her, or they'd just pool their own money and buy her a pair themselves. Their father let them keep the money from the cans. That was another good thing Therese could say about him. He didn't let everyone keep the money they earned. He made their mother hand over her wages from cleaning elderly ladies' houses a few days a week. When he got home from work at the machine shop, he set his lunch bag and thermos on the counter and held out his palm. Davai, he said, give it. Always keep some money of your own, Therese's mother whispered to her once, before she took on 2 extra cleaning jobs a week that their father couldn't know about. All the children knew those jobs must never be discussed, those women's names never mentioned. If their father ever stayed home sick from work on one of those days, one of the children took a detour on the way to school, stopping at whichever house it was, to let the woman know their mother couldn't come. Why not? Our father's sick. Ah, yes, he is, isn't he? The women sometimes said. The lonely elderly ones who offered their mother cups of coffee when she arrived and asked her questions about her children and her own mother in Poland and urged her to take a break and bought yellow latex gloves to protect her hands as she plunged rags into buckets of caustic cleaning solutions. They were the ones who wondered if their cleaning lady had a new bruise peeking out from under a sleeve or a slight limp she hadn't had the week before. They were the ones who slipped her the women's shelter brochures, the ones she took but never used. Some of the women for whom their mother cleaned were widows, some were spinsters. One was a Stanford literature professor named Eileen, who rented a cottage in a cul-de-sac half a block away from Therese's family. Eileen didn't know her cleaning lady didn't bring her own latex gloves because she was always at work. She left a key under the doormat and money on the counter. But once Eileen was home, and the cleaning lady shyly told Eileen that her baby, her youngest, liked to read and make up stories, would Eileen like to read something she'd written? Eileen would not like to. She had plenty of her own students writing to read. But she felt sorry for her cleaning lady, who didn't speak English very well and lived in a home Eileen knew she wasn't supposed to call. Eileen was a feminist who had not only read Betty Friedan, but had talked to her at a conference once. So yes, she would do this one small favor for her cleaning lady, who really was a bargain, who did a superb job every week for merely $8 an hour in under 4 hours. Yes, she would read her cleaning lady's youngest daughter's little story about a squirrel who lived in an oak tree at the shaggy edges of Stanford campus and sometimes watched, with his beady little eyes, a family of 6 with a scythe and a Buick raking up grass to feed their rabbits in hutches behind the garage, rabbits for pets and meat. And she would write at the bottom, "What an interesting story. I like how we see this family from the squirrel's point of view. What's another, more original way to describe eyes rather than beady? Keep up the good work and keep writing." Years later, at a reception in the wood-paneled faculty lounge of a different university where Therese now taught literature herself, she wondered whatever happened to Eileen. She couldn't remember when or why her mother had stopped cleaning her house. Eileen was just renting that little cottage. She must have retired from Stanford by now, moved away. Therese made polite chit-chat with a white-haired professor from the law school. They both held clear plastic glasses of white wine on cocktail napkins inscribed with the university logo. The law professor wore an Argyle sweater over his button-down shirt with a yellow and gray polka-dotted bow tie. Therese had never seen anyone actually wear a bow tie in real life. The law professor asked her where she'd grown up. "Palo Alto," she said. "Ah," he said, nodding, and then asked, "Were your parents affiliated with the university?" Therese smiled. She thought about the scythe, the piles of cut grass, the empty stadium with its empty cans, her mother scrubbing Eileen's kitchen floor on her hands and knees. She, Therese, the baby of the family, the fiction writer, she replied, yes, yes they were. Thank you so much.